"Ma'am, you need to return to your assigned seat immediately." Flight attendant Helena Voss's voice cut through the cabin's morning chatter as she towered over Captain Laura Mitchell in seat 2A, her red uniform blazer crisp under the aircraft's bright overhead lighting. Laura looked up from her book, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating her calm expression and simple green blouse and dark jeans. "I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake with your upgrade." Helena Voss's smile was razor-thin as passengers turned to stare. "The gentleman behind you paid extra to ensure a more comfortable flight experience." She gestured toward a smirking businessman in an expensive suit who nodded approvingly. Laura's military-trained posture remained perfectly composed as Helena Voss's hand moved toward her shoulder. "You can either move voluntarily or we'll have security escort you back to coach where you belong." None of them realized they were about to humiliate a woman who had taken enemy fire for this country and whose next words would ground their flight indefinitely. "Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background." Laura Mitchell closed her military history book with deliberate precision, her movements carrying the controlled grace of someone accustomed to maintaining composure under pressure. The fluorescent cabin lighting cast harsh shadows across Helena Voss's face as she waited for compliance, her red blazer somehow making her appear more predatory than professional. Behind them, Charles Whitfield adjusted his expensive tie with visible satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle he had orchestrated. "I'd like to see the complaint, please," Laura said quietly, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous situations than this pressurized aluminum tube. Her dark eyes met Helena Voss's with unwavering steadiness, betraying nothing of the recognition dawning within her that this confrontation had nothing to do with seating assignments and everything to do with the color of her skin. Helena Voss's perfectly applied smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself with increased venom. "That's not how this works," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "The computer system made an error. People like you don't typically fly first class, and we need to correct this mistake immediately." Her manicured hand gestured dismissively toward the coach section, as if she were shooing away an unwanted pest. The phrase "people like you" hung in the recycled air like a toxic cloud, and Laura felt the familiar tightness in her chest that she'd experienced countless times before, not from fear, but from the weary recognition of prejudice dressed up in corporate policy. Around them, passengers craned their necks to get a better view, some recording with their phones while others whispered among themselves about the unfolding drama. "I have my boarding pass right here," Laura said evenly, reaching into her leather bag with movements that spoke of military precision. She produced the first-class ticket she had legitimately purchased, holding it out with steady fingers. "As you can see, seat 2A was assigned to me at booking. I paid the full fare." Charles Whitfield leaned forward from his seat behind her, his expensive cologne mixing unpleasantly with the cabin's recycled air. "I specifically requested a peaceful flight experience," he interjected, his voice carrying the entitled tone of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I shouldn't have to deal with disruptions when I'm paying premium prices." Helena Voss barely glanced at Laura's boarding pass before waving it away as if it were contaminated. "The computer system has been having issues with upgrades," she insisted, her lie delivered with practiced ease. "I'm sure you understand that we need to maintain certain standards in first class." She emphasized the word standards in a way that made her meaning crystal clear to everyone within earshot. Laura's military training had taught her to assess situations quickly and thoroughly. She recognized the coordinated nature of this attack, the way Helena Voss and Charles Whitfield fed off each other's energy, emboldening each other to escalate their discriminatory behavior. She also noted the growing murmurs of discomfort from other passengers, some of whom seemed disturbed by what they were witnessing. "Ma'am, I served this country for 12 years, Laura said quietly, her dignity intact despite the public humiliation being heaped upon her. "I've earned the right to sit anywhere I can afford to purchase a ticket." Her words carried weight that Helena Voss was too prejudiced to recognize, the kind of weight that came from leading soldiers through firefights and making life or death decisions under enemy fire. Helena Voss's response was swift and cutting. "Everyone claims to be a veteran these days," she said with a dismissive laugh. "That doesn't give you special privileges or the right to disrupt other passengers' comfort." She gestured again toward Charles Whitfield, who nodded vigorously in agreement. "Sir Whitfield here is a platinum member of our loyalty program, and his concerns take priority." The casual dismissal of her service hit Laura harder than incoming mortar rounds ever had. She had faced down Taliban fighters who respected her more than this flight attendant in her pressed red uniform, but her military discipline held firm, keeping her expression neutral and her voice controlled. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose her composure. "I need to call for backup," Helena Voss announced dramatically, reaching for her radio with theatrical flair. "We have a non-compliant passenger who's refusing to follow crew instructions." Her voice carried across the cabin, ensuring maximum embarrassment for Laura, while positioning herself as the victim of the situation she had created. Within moments, another flight attendant appeared, Jennifer Walsh, her matching red uniform blazer marking her as Helena Voss's ally in this orchestrated humiliation. She approached with the same condescending smile, having clearly been briefed on the situation by her colleague. Jennifer's presence seemed to embolden Helena Voss further, providing her with the backup she needed to escalate the confrontation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Jennifer asked, though her tone suggested she had already chosen sides before hearing any facts. She positioned herself slightly behind Helena Voss, creating a united front of airline authority against Laura's solitary figure. "This passenger is refusing to return to her proper seat assignment," Helena Voss explained, her version of events painting Laura as the aggressor rather than the victim. "She's claiming computer errors and military service, but she needs to understand that first class has certain expectations." Laura felt the eyes of dozens of passengers boring into her, some sympathetic, others merely curious about the drama unfolding before their morning flight. She recognized the impossible position she had been placed in: comply with obvious discrimination and validate their prejudiced assumptions, or resist and be labeled as the disruptive passenger they were already painting her as. Charles Whitfield chose that moment to add his voice to the chorus of condemnation. "I don't feel safe with her up here," he declared loudly, his words designed to carry maximum impact. His expensive suit and platinum status gave his complaint weight in the airline's hierarchy, weight that Laura's legitimate ticket and military service apparently could not match. The irony was not lost on Laura, that a man who had likely never faced genuine danger in his life was claiming to feel unsafe in the presence of someone who had spent years protecting people exactly like him. She had taken shrapnel meant for American soldiers, had pulled wounded comrades from burning vehicles, had earned decorations that most people could only dream of receiving. Yet here she sat, being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while black in first class. "We're going to need to call security," Helena Voss announced with evident satisfaction. She had orchestrated this moment perfectly, creating a situation where Laura's only choices were public humiliation or escalated confrontation. The flight attendant's red blazer seemed to glow under the harsh cabin lighting as she prepared to summon the next level of authority to deal with her perceived problem. Jennifer Walsh nodded in agreement, her matching uniform creating a wall of corporate authority that felt impenetrable. The two women stood over Laura like judges rendering a verdict, their body language screaming superiority and righteousness despite the obvious injustice of their actions. Laura took a slow, measured breath. the kind she had learned to take before making critical decisions in combat zones. She could feel the weight of expectation from the watching passengers, some of whom were clearly hoping she would fight back, while others seemed to expect her to simply accept the discrimination being heaped upon her. "I will comply under protest," Laura said finally, her voice carrying across the cabin with unmistakable dignity. She began gathering her belongings with the same precise movements that had served her well in military operations, each action deliberate and controlled. Her book slipped into her leather bag alongside her boarding pass, the evidence of her legitimate right to be there dismissed as easily as her years of service. The words "under protest" carried legal weight that Helena Voss was too arrogant to recognize, but they would prove prophetic in ways none of them could imagine. As security was summoned and passengers continued recording the humiliation of a decorated war hero, none of them realized that this moment would soon explode across social media and news networks, transforming their routine flight into a national scandal that would cost careers and change policies. Laura's quiet dignity in the face of such obvious injustice was about to become a rallying cry for respect and equality. But for now, she simply sat in her purchased seat, waiting for the next escalation in a battle she had never wanted to fight, but was uniquely qualified to win. The fluorescent cabin lights cast sharp shadows across the first-class section as heavy footsteps approached down the narrow aisle. Two security officers moved with practiced authority through the morning sunlight streaming through the aircraft windows, their muscular frames filling out standard blue uniforms with short sleeves. The larger officer, David Park, led the way with a weathered face that spoke of years in law enforcement, while his partner Tom Wilson followed close behind, clipboard in hand and radio crackling softly at his shoulder. Helena Voss straightened her red uniform blazer and smoothed down her hair, a smile of barely concealed satisfaction spreading across her face as she watched the officers approach Captain Laura Mitchell's seat. The morning light revealed every detail of her expression, the gleam in her eyes as she prepared to explain what she undoubtedly considered a job well done. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," Helena Voss began, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that flight attendants reserved for difficult passengers. "This passenger has been causing a disturbance and refusing to comply with airline policies. She's in a seat that doesn't belong to her and has been argumentative when asked to move to her proper location." From 3 rows back, Charles Whitfield leaned forward in his expensive navy suit, his voice cutting through the cabin's tense atmosphere. "Officers, I'm the one who complained about this situation. I paid good money for first class, and I shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable or unsafe during my flight. This woman clearly doesn't belong here. And when I expressed my concerns to the flight attendant, she became belligerent." Captain Laura Mitchell remained seated, her green blouse crisp despite the morning's events, her dark jeans pressed and professional. She closed the book about military history that had been resting in her lap, a thick volume about Afghanistan conflict operations, and set it carefully on the seat beside her. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, each gesture speaking of years of discipline and training that most passengers couldn't recognize, but that registered somewhere in the subconscious of those watching. David Park studied the scene before him, his experienced eyes taking in details that his partner might miss. Something about the way Captain Laura Mitchell sat, the perfect posture that seemed natural rather than forced, the calm alertness in her eyes, triggered recognition in his military-trained mind. He'd seen that bearing before, in fellow soldiers, in officers who'd earned their composure through trials most civilians couldn't imagine. "Ma'am," David Park said, his voice respectful but official, "we've received reports of a disturbance. Can you tell me what's happening here?" Captain Laura Mitchell looked up at the officers with clear, steady eyes that held no trace of anger or fear, only a quiet resignation that suggested she'd faced worse challenges than airline discrimination. "Officers, I'm Captain Laura Mitchell. I purchased this first-class seat with my own money and have all the proper documentation. The flight attendant asked me to move to coach based on what appears to be a complaint from another passenger, but no one has been able to explain what rule or regulation I've violated. She reached into her worn leather military-style bag, a piece that had clearly seen years of use and travel, its brass fittings polished but scratched from countless deployments and transfers. From an interior pocket, she withdrew her boarding pass and identification, holding them out for the officers to examine. Helena Voss stepped forward quickly, her red blazer catching the overhead lights as she gestured dismissively. "Officers, don't let her confuse the situation with paperwork. The computer system made an error, and people like her often try to take advantage of these mistakes. She needs to move to coach where she belongs, and the sooner we resolve this, the sooner we can get this flight in the air." The phrase "people like her" hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young black man in an orange shirt and blue jeans, seated 4 rows back, looked up from his phone with sharp attention. Derek Monroe had been scrolling through social media when the commotion began, but something in the woman's bearing, the way she held herself with quiet dignity, made him look closer. Derek Monroe recognized something familiar in Captain Laura Mitchell's posture. The same controlled calm he'd seen in his older brother when he returned from his second tour overseas. Military discipline, earned through fire and hardship, was unmistakable once you knew how to look for it. Discreetly, he activated his phone's camera and began recording, angling it to capture the unfolding scene while keeping the device low and unobtrusive. Captain Laura Mitchell stood slowly, her movements revealing the perfect posture that years of military training had ingrained in every muscle and bone. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself with a presence that commanded respect, her shoulders square and her spine straight, without appearing rigid or confrontational. The morning sunlight streaming through the cabin windows seemed to illuminate her natural dignity as she faced the security officers. "Officers, I want you to know that I'm a veteran," Captain Laura Mitchell said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled strength that suggested she'd given orders under pressure and knew how to maintain composure in chaos. "I've served my country honorably, and I'm asking for your professional courtesy in handling this situation. I'll comply with whatever you decide, but I want it on record that I've done nothing wrong and have been treated unfairly based on assumptions about who I am, rather than any actual misconduct." David Park felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than professional training. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq himself, and he knew military bearing when he saw it. The way this woman spoke, the respectful but firm tone, the automatic deference to authority coupled with quiet assertion of her rights, all of it screamed veteran to his experienced eye. "Ma'am, what branch did you serve in?" David Park asked, his voice softening slightly as his partner Tom Wilson looked between them with growing confusion. "Army, sir. Infantry and Special Operations in Afghanistan," Captain Laura Mitchell replied, and there was something in the way she said it, without boasting but with the quiet pride of someone who'd earned the right to those words through blood and sacrifice. Helena Voss's face flushed red, nearly matching her blazer, as she sensed the conversation slipping away from her control. "Officers, this is exactly what I'm talking about. She's trying to manipulate the situation with sob stories about military service. Anyone can claim to be a veteran. The fact remains that she's in a seat she doesn't belong in, and she needs to move immediately." The flight attendant's voice had risen to a pitch that was beginning to draw attention from passengers throughout the cabin. Her gestures became more dramatic, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know troublemakers when I see them. This woman is going to be a problem for the entire flight if we don't establish authority right now." Captain Laura Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of steel that suggested Helena Voss was treading on dangerous ground. Still, her voice remained level and controlled when she spoke. "I understand that you have procedures to follow, and I respect that. But I also have rights as a paying customer and as an American citizen. I'm documenting this entire interaction, and I trust that the truth will eventually come to light." From her worn leather bag, she withdrew a small notebook and pen, the kind of field equipment that military personnel learn to carry everywhere. With precise economical movements, she began writing down details: the time, the officers' badge numbers which she read from their uniforms, Helena Voss's name from her badge, and Charles Whitfield's seat number which she noted with a quick glance in his direction. Other passengers were beginning to take notice of the commotion, their conversations dying down as they strained to hear what was happening in first class. The contrast between Captain Laura Mitchell's calm professionalism and Helena Voss's increasingly agitated behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. Several passengers frowned as they watched the scene unfold, their expressions suggesting growing disapproval of the flight attendant's conduct. Derek Monroe continued filming discreetly, his phone capturing the stark difference between the two women's demeanor. He'd grown up in a military family and recognized the signs of someone who'd been through real adversity. Captain Laura Mitchell's calm wasn't the forced composure of someone trying to make a scene. It was the genuine tranquility of someone who'd faced life and death situations and knew that airline drama, however unfair, didn't compare to real danger. Tom Wilson, the younger security officer, looked increasingly uncomfortable as he watched Helena Voss's behavior escalate. His training had taught him to de-escalate situations, but the flight attendant seemed determined to push the confrontation to its breaking point. "Ma'am," he said to Helena Voss, "maybe we should take a step back and review the actual policies here. If the passenger has valid documentation for her seat, don't you start questioning my authority too," Helena Voss snapped, whirling on the officer with flashing eyes. "I know airline policy better than anyone on this aircraft, and I'm telling you that this passenger needs to be moved immediately. The customer who complained is a frequent flyer and a platinum member, and his comfort takes priority over someone who's obviously using a ticket she shouldn't have." The mask was slipping completely now, revealing the prejudice that had been barely concealed beneath Helena Voss's professional facade. Her voice carried across the cabin, and more passengers turned to stare at the unfolding drama. Some began reaching for their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Captain Laura Mitchell finished writing in her notebook and returned it to her bag with the same precise care she'd shown throughout the interaction. She gathered her few belongings, the military history book tucked under her arm alongside her leather bag, and faced the security officers with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained from the beginning. "Officers, I'll comply with your decision," she said simply. "I ask only that you document the reasons for my removal and ensure that this interaction is properly reported to your supervisors. I believe in following proper channels and trusting that justice will ultimately prevail." As Captain Laura Mitchell prepared to leave her seat, Derek Monroe made his decision. Rising from his seat in coach, he walked forward with his orange shirt bright under the cabin lights, his blue jeans and casual appearance marking him as someone who understood working for respect rather than inheriting it. "Excuse me," Derek Monroe said quietly, approaching Captain Laura Mitchell with obvious respect. "I just wanted to thank you for your service, ma'am. I can tell you're military, and I appreciate everything you've done for our country." Captain Laura Mitchell's composed expression softened slightly, the first genuine smile she'd shown since the ordeal began. "Thank you, young man. That means more than you know." The simple exchange carried weight that Helena Voss couldn't understand, but that resonated through the cabin like a bell. Other passengers began to murmur among themselves, piecing together what they were witnessing, and the morning sunlight seemed to highlight the dignity of a woman who'd served her country only to face discrimination at 30,000 feet. The cockpit of Flight 847 hummed with the familiar symphony of pre-flight preparation. Bright overhead fluorescent lights illuminated every switch, gauge, and digital display as Captain Michael Brennan methodically worked through his checklist. His crisp blue airline uniform bore the 4 gold stripes of his rank, and his weathered hands moved with the precision of someone who had performed these rituals thousands of times. The morning sunlight streamed through the cockpit windows, casting everything in sharp, professional clarity. Fuel load confirmed. Weather looks good for Denver, co-pilot Sarah Kim announced, her own blue uniform impeccable as she cross-referenced the flight plan on her tablet. Though we've got a 15-minute delay due to some passenger situation in the cabin, Captain Michael Brennan nodded absently, his attention split between the instrument panel checks and the growing curiosity about what could cause such a delay. In his 12 years with the airline, passenger removals were rare and usually involved intoxication or medical emergencies. What kind of situation? Sarah consulted her notes, reading from the communication she'd received from the gate. Flight attendant Helena Voss reported a disruptive passenger who was removed from first class. Apparently there was some kind of seating dispute that escalated. Escalated how? Captain Michael Brennan's eyebrows furrowed as he paused in his pre-flight routine. His Navy background had taught him to dig deeper when initial reports seemed vague or incomplete. The report says the passenger was argumentative and made other first-class passengers uncomfortable. Helena requested security assistance for removal. Sarah shrugged, but something in her expression suggested she found the explanation as unsatisfying as he did. Captain Michael Brennan activated the internal cabin monitoring system, a feature pilots use to observe passenger boarding and assess any potential security concerns. The bright cabin lighting revealed the typical scene of passengers settling into their seats, stowing luggage, and checking their phones. But his trained eye immediately focused on something unusual in the coach section. There, in seat 24B, sat a black woman in a green blouse and dark jeans who carried herself with an unmistakable bearing that Captain Michael Brennan recognized instantly. Her posture was perfectly straight without being rigid, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her eyes alert but peaceful. It was the bearing of someone who had served in uniform, someone who understood discipline, hierarchy, and grace under pressure. "Sarah, take a look at the passenger in 24B, he said, angling the monitor so his co-pilot could see. Sarah studied the screen, her expression shifting from casual interest to puzzlement. "She looks completely calm. Definitely not what I'd expect from someone who was just removed for being disruptive." Captain Michael Brennan's own military experience kicked in. He had served 6 years in the Navy before transitioning to commercial aviation, and he could spot a fellow service member from across a crowded terminal. Everything about the woman's demeanor spoke of military training, from her alert but relaxed posture to the way she observed her surroundings without appearing paranoid or aggressive. The cockpit door chimed, and flight attendant Helena Voss entered, her red uniform blazer slightly disheveled and her face flushed with what appeared to be a mixture of anger and excitement. "Captain Brennan, I need to brief you on the security situation we just resolved." "Go ahead," Captain Michael Brennan said, studying Helena's expression carefully. In his years of flying, he had developed a keen sense for reading people, and something about Helena's demeanor raised immediate red flags. Helena launched into her account with dramatic flourishes, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. "We had a very problematic passenger in first class who absolutely refused to cooperate with our seating policies. She was clearly in the wrong seat and became increasingly hostile when I tried to resolve the situation professionally." "Hostile how, specifically?" Captain Michael Brennan asked, his tone carefully neutral but probing. Helena paused for a fraction of a second, and Captain Michael Brennan caught the slight hesitation before she continued. "She was argumentative, questioned my authority, and made the other first-class passengers extremely uncomfortable." "Mr. Whitfield in 3A specifically complained about feeling unsafe with her presence. Did she make any threats? Use profanity? Raise her voice? Captain Michael Brennan pressed, watching Helena's face carefully. Again that telltale pause. Well, not exactly threats, but her whole attitude was menacing. You know how some people get when they're told they can't have something they think they deserve. She kept insisting she belonged in first class and claimed to be military, probably hoping that would get her special treatment. Sarah Kim glanced at Captain Michael Brennan, and he caught the skepticism in her expression. The woman they had observed on the monitor had displayed none of the behaviors Helena was describing. She claimed to be military? Captain Michael Brennan asked, his voice sharpening slightly. Oh yes, played that card immediately, Helena said with a dismissive wave. They always do when they get caught trying to upgrade themselves illegally. She probably bought some military surplus clothing and thinks she can fool people. Captain Michael Brennan felt his jaw tighten. His respect for military service ran deep, and the casual dismissal of what might be legitimate service triggered his protective instincts. Did you ask to see her military ID? Helena looked momentarily flustered. I don't think airline policy requires us to verify every claim passengers make about their backgrounds. The important thing is that she was clearly trying to scam her way into first class, and when I maintained professional standards, she became difficult. The cockpit communication system crackled to life, and gate agent Lucia Navarro's voice came through clearly. Captain Brennan, this is Lucia at the gate. I'm receiving multiple passenger complaints about the handling of the seating situation. Several passengers are requesting to file formal complaints, and I have someone asking to speak with a supervisor about what they witnessed. Captain Michael Brennan exchanged a meaningful look with Sarah. Legitimate passenger removals rarely generated this kind of secondary complaint activity. What kind of complaints, Lucia? Passengers are saying they witnessed what appeared to be discriminatory treatment. One passenger specifically mentioned that the removed passenger was calm and respectful throughout the entire incident, and several people are questioning whether proper procedures were followed. Helena's face reddened, and she stepped closer to the captain's chair. Captain, I hope you're not going to let a few bleeding heart passengers second-guess my professional judgment. I've been doing this job for 8 years, and I know how to handle difficult passengers. If you start letting people challenge flight attendant authority, you'll have chaos on every flight. Captain Michael Brennan studied Helena's increasingly agitated demeanor, contrasting it with the composed woman he had observed on the monitor. His military training had taught him to gather intelligence before making critical decisions, and every instinct told him that he wasn't getting the full truth. Helena, I'm going to need you to document exactly what happened for the flight report, he said carefully. Specific actions, specific words, timeline of events. If this becomes a formal complaint, we'll need detailed records. Of course, Helena said quickly, but her eyes darted away from his direct gaze. I'll write everything up after we're in the air. Right now, I just need your assurance that if she causes any more problems, you'll support my decision to have her removed entirely from the aircraft. Captain Michael Brennan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up the passenger manifest on his computer system, scrolling through the first-class seating assignments. What seat was she originally in? I believe it was 2A, Helena said, her voice less confident than before. Captain Michael Brennan found seat 2A on the manifest and saw that it was indeed assigned to Laura Mitchell with a confirmed first-class ticket purchase. His frown deepened as he cross-referenced the information with the payment details, finding everything in perfect order. Her ticket shows a legitimate first-class purchase, he said, looking up at Helena with growing suspicion. Paid for 3 days ago. Confirmation number matches. No flags in the system. Helena's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive indignation. The computer system must have had a glitch. You know how unreliable those booking systems can be. The important thing is that Mr. Whitfield, a platinum-level frequent flyer, was uncomfortable with the situation. And what specifically made Mr. Whitfield uncomfortable? Captain Michael Brennan asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. Helena hesitated again, clearly searching for the right words. He felt that her presence in first class was inappropriate, and as a valued customer, his comfort is our priority. The pieces were falling into place in Captain Michael Brennan's mind, and the picture they formed made his stomach turn. He had witnessed discrimination before, both in the military and in civilian life, and he recognized the patterns of behavior that Helena was displaying. "Sarah, take over the pre-flight," he said, unbuckling his harness and standing up. "I'm going to personally assess this situation before we proceed with takeoff." Helena looked alarmed. "Captain, that's really not necessary. The situation has been resolved, and we're already delayed. Corporate prefers that we maintain schedules whenever possible. Corporate also prefers that we don't expose the airline to discrimination lawsuits," Captain Michael Brennan replied firmly. "I'm going to speak with this passenger myself and verify that proper procedures were followed." He moved toward the cockpit door, his mind already focused on what he would say to the woman in 24B. His military experience had taught him to treat all service members with respect until proven otherwise, and his airline experience had taught him that passenger complaints usually contained at least some truth. "Captain, please don't let her manipulate you with sob stories," Helena called after him. "Some people are very good at playing the victim when they get caught doing something wrong." Captain Michael Brennan paused at the door and turned back to face Helena. Her red uniform blazer was wrinkled from stress, her face was flushed with anxiety, and her eyes held a desperation that confirmed his growing suspicions about what had really occurred in first class. "Helena, if this passenger is truly what you claim, then speaking with her will confirm that and support your actions," he said evenly. "If she's not, then we have a much bigger problem to address." He left the cockpit and began walking through the aircraft cabin, his trained eyes taking in every detail. The bright overhead lighting illuminated the faces of passengers, some of whom looked up at him with curiosity and others with what appeared to be concern. As he moved toward the coach section, he could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something significant had occurred that went beyond a simple seating dispute. In seat 24B, Captain Laura Mitchell sat with the same composed dignity he had observed on the monitor. Her green blouse neat and professional, her posture reflecting years of military bearing. As he approached, she looked up with alert, respectful eyes that reminded him of every professional service member he had ever known. The afternoon sun streamed through the aircraft windows, casting natural light across the coach cabin as Captain Michael Brennan made his way down the narrow aisle. The overhead fluorescent lighting illuminated every detail of the unfolding drama, from the concerned expressions of passengers to the rigid posture of the woman seated in 24B. His pilot's uniform, a crisp blue shirt with gold stripes on the shoulders, commanded immediate respect as he moved purposefully through the cabin. Captain Laura Mitchell sat with perfect military bearing, her green blouse unwrinkled despite the stress of the situation, her dark jeans pressed with precision that spoke of years of military discipline. Her hands rested calmly on the worn leather military bag in her lap, and she looked up with clear, intelligent eyes as the pilot approached her row. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Michael Brennan, the pilot of this aircraft," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command but tempered with genuine respect. "Would you mind if we spoke privately for a moment, perhaps near the galley area?" Helena Voss, who had been hovering nearby in her wrinkled red uniform blazer, immediately stepped forward with suspicious eyes. Her blonde hair had come loose from its professional style during the earlier confrontation, and her makeup showed signs of stress-induced perspiration under the bright cabin lighting. "Captain, that's completely unnecessary," Helena Voss interrupted, her voice sharp with defensive irritation. "The situation has been resolved. The passenger has been relocated according to airline policy, and we're already significantly delayed. We really need to prepare for departure immediately." Captain Michael Brennan's dark eyes shifted to Helena Voss with a look that could freeze water. His military training in the Navy had taught him to recognize evasion and dishonesty, and every instinct screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. "Miss Voss, I wasn't addressing you," he said with controlled firmness. "I'm speaking directly with this passenger, and I'd appreciate your patience while I conduct my investigation." Captain Laura Mitchell rose gracefully from her seat, her movement displaying the fluid precision of someone accustomed to military protocols. "Of course, Captain Brennan, I'm happy to speak with you. I appreciate your professionalism in this matter." Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous situations than a commercial aircraft cabin. The surrounding passengers watched with growing interest as the pilot escorted her toward the galley area, their conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation throughout the coach section. Derek Monroe, the young black man in his bright orange shirt and blue jeans who had been observing the entire situation from seat 26A, leaned slightly into the aisle to better hear the conversation. His phone remained discreetly positioned to continue recording, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. In the galley area, surrounded by the aircraft's bright overhead lighting and the gentle hum of the ventilation system, Captain Michael Brennan faced Captain Laura Mitchell directly. His expression was serious but respectful, and his years of military service had taught him to recognize a fellow veteran from their bearing alone. "Ma'am, I need to ask you directly about your military background," Captain Michael Brennan said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the confined space. "I can see from your posture and demeanor that you've served, and my experience tells me there's more to this situation than what I've been told." Captain Laura Mitchell's expression remained composed, but a flicker of appreciation crossed her features at his perceptiveness. "Yes, Captain Brennan, I served in Afghanistan with the Army. 3 tours of duty, but I prefer not to make a big deal about it." Her humility was evident in every word, the kind of understated grace that often characterized those who had seen real combat. She stood with her feet slightly apart, hands clasped behind her back, in an unconscious parade rest position that spoke of years of military conditioning. Derek Monroe, who had moved closer to the galley area under the pretense of stretching his legs, called out softly, "Captain, I overheard her thanking someone for their service earlier. She seemed to really understand what it meant to serve." Captain Michael Brennan's instincts, honed by his own naval service and years of reading people under pressure, told him he was dealing with someone extraordinary. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that made his blood pressure rise with each passing second. "Ma'am, would you mind showing me your military identification? I know it might seem unusual, but I have a strong feeling that my crew has made a significant error in judgment today." Captain Laura Mitchell reached into her leather bag with practiced efficiency, producing both her military ID and her driver's license. The documents were kept in pristine condition, protected in a leather wallet that showed the wear of someone who had carried it through challenging circumstances. As Captain Michael Brennan examined the identification cards under the bright galley lighting, his expression underwent a dramatic transformation. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened, and the color drained from his face as he processed what he was seeing. The name was familiar, but seeing the rank, the service record notation, and the small Medal of Honor indicator made his hands actually tremble. "Captain Laura Mitchell," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and growing rage at the situation. "You're the Captain Laura Mitchell, the one who saved 37 soldiers during the ambush at Forward Operating Base Delta." Captain Laura Mitchell's modest nod confirmed what Captain Michael Brennan's mind was struggling to process. He had read about her in military publications, had followed her story through the veterans' networks, had even attended a presentation where her actions under fire were used as an example of extraordinary courage and leadership. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just any veteran who had been discriminated against. This was a genuine American hero, a Medal of Honor recipient who had risked her life repeatedly to save others, who had shown the kind of courage that inspired entire military units, and whose story was taught in leadership courses across the armed forces. Helena Voss approached the galley area with impatient steps, her red blazer swishing as she moved with the entitled confidence of someone who believed she controlled the situation. Her expression showed complete obliviousness to the earth-shattering revelation that had just occurred mere feet away from her. "Captain Brennan, what's causing this additional delay?" she demanded, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone accustomed to getting her way through persistence and volume. "We have a schedule to maintain, and frankly, I think we've already been more than accommodating to this passenger. The other first-class passengers are complaining about the continued disruption." Captain Michael Brennan turned to face Helena Voss with an expression of barely controlled fury that made several nearby passengers take notice. His military bearing became rigid with righteous anger, and his voice carried a tone that could cut through steel. The contrast between the two authority figures was stark under the aircraft's bright lighting. Captain Michael Brennan stood with the solid presence of someone who had earned his position through merit and service, while Helena Voss fidgeted with nervous energy, completely unaware that her career was about to implode around her. "Miss Voss," Captain Michael Brennan said slowly, each word weighted with significance, "do you have any idea who you just humiliated? Do you have even the slightest concept of what you've done?" Helena Voss's expression showed confusion mixed with defensive irritation. "I don't know what you mean, Captain. I followed standard airline procedures when dealing with a passenger complaint. Mr. Whitfield in first class felt uncomfortable, and I addressed his concerns appropriately." The sheer magnitude of her ignorance struck Captain Michael Brennan like a slap. Here stood a woman who had just discriminatorily removed one of the nation's most decorated heroes, based on nothing more than racial prejudice and entitled passenger complaints, and she remained completely oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Captain Laura Mitchell remained standing in perfect military posture, her dignity intact despite the ongoing discussion about her treatment. She watched the exchange between the pilot and flight attendant with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating situations under pressure. Derek Monroe had positioned himself where he could observe the entire interaction, his phone continuing to record discreetly while his expression showed growing understanding of the significance of what was unfolding. Other passengers in the nearby rows had begun to sense that something extraordinary was happening, their conversations quieting as they strained to hear the galley discussion. Captain Michael Brennan looked at Captain Laura Mitchell with profound respect and then back at Helena Voss with disgust that seemed to radiate from his entire being. The injustice of the situation, the sheer wrongness of a Medal of Honor recipient being treated with such disrespect, filled him with a rage that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. "Ms. Voss," he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of command authority, "you have just discriminatorily removed a Medal of Honor recipient from her rightful seat. You have humiliated one of this country's most decorated war heroes based on nothing more than the racist complaints of an entitled passenger." Helena Voss's face showed the first flickers of uncertainty, but her response revealed the depth of her prejudice and professional arrogance. "Captain, I'm sure you're mistaken. People make up stories about military service all the time. I was just doing my job according to company policy." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, confirming everything Captain Michael Brennan needed to know about Helena Voss's character and judgment. He realized he was facing not just a case of poor customer service, but a fundamental moral failure that demanded immediate and decisive action. As he stood in that brightly lit galley, surrounded by the evidence of discrimination and the quiet dignity of a genuine American hero, Captain Michael Brennan made a decision that would change everything: the airline industry, Helena Voss's career, and the lives of everyone on that aircraft. were about to be transformed by the power of truth and the consequences of prejudice, meeting genuine heroism. Captain Michael Brennan's boots echoed against the aircraft floor as he walked back toward the cockpit, his jaw set in a hard line that his crew had never seen before. The bright overhead cabin lighting illuminated his face, revealing the storm brewing behind his eyes. 23 years of military service and 15 years of commercial aviation had never prepared him for this moment. He had just discovered that his airline had humiliated one of America's most decorated war heroes. The cockpit's instrument panel cast its familiar glow across his weathered hands as he slid into the captain's seat. Co-pilot Sarah Kim looked up from her pre-flight checklist, her blue airline shirt crisp under the bright overhead lighting. She noticed immediately that something had changed in her captain's demeanor. "Everything all right, Captain?" Sarah asked, setting down her clipboard. The concern in her voice was evident as she studied his expression. Captain Michael Brennan reached for the radio handset, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to shock you. That woman who was removed from first class, she's Captain Laura Mitchell, Medal of Honor recipient, Afghanistan veteran. She saved dozens of lives under enemy fire." Sarah's eyes widened, her mouth opening slightly in disbelief. The Captain Laura Mitchell? The one from the news stories about the Kandahar rescue? The very same. Captain Michael Brennan's voice carried the weight of his revelation. He pressed the communication button. "Operations. This is Captain Brennan on Flight 447. We have a serious situation that requires immediate supervisor intervention." The crackling response came quickly. "Go ahead, Captain Brennan. I have a Medal of Honor recipient who was discriminatorily removed from her assigned first-class seat by our cabin crew. I am considering refusing to operate this flight until this matter is resolved appropriately." Static filled the cockpit before operations responded. "Captain, please clarify. Did you say Medal of Honor recipient?" "Affirmative. Captain Laura Mitchell, United States Army, Medal of Honor. She was humiliated and removed from first class based on what appears to be racial discrimination. I need a supervisor here immediately, and I want the flight attendant responsible removed from this aircraft." Sarah Kim stared at her captain with newfound respect. In all her years of flying, she had never witnessed a pilot take such a stand. The weight of the moment settled over the cockpit like a heavy blanket. The cockpit door burst open with sudden force. Helena Voss stormed in, her red blazer now wrinkled from stress, her usually pristine appearance showing signs of the tension building throughout the cabin. Her face was flushed with anger and frustration. "Captain Brennan, what is the meaning of these delays?" Helena demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I have passengers asking questions, and we need to get this flight moving. That woman in coach is causing disruption just by being here." Captain Michael Brennan slowly turned in his seat to face Helena Voss. The bright cockpit lighting cast harsh shadows across his face, making his expression appear even more severe. "Helena, do you know who you just removed from first class?" "Some woman who obviously doesn't belong there," Helena replied dismissively, waving her hand. "Look, Captain, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know how to spot passengers who don't fit. She was probably using a stolen credit card or frequent flyer miles that weren't hers." Sarah Kim gasped audibly, unable to believe what she was hearing. Captain Michael Brennan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his seat. "Helena, you just humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient. Captain Laura Mitchell served 3 tours in Afghanistan and saved countless American lives under enemy fire. She is one of the most decorated soldiers in our nation's history." Helena Voss threw back her head and laughed, a sound that filled the cockpit with its harsh mockery. "Oh, come on, Captain. You can't seriously believe that story. You know how these people are. They're probably lying like they all do, making up stories about military service to get sympathy and special treatment." The silence that followed Helena's words was deafening. Captain Michael Brennan stared at her with an expression that could have melted steel. Sarah Kim looked between them, her face reflecting the horror of what she had just witnessed. These people? Captain Michael Brennan's voice was dangerously quiet. Did you just refer to a Medal of Honor recipient as these people? Helena Voss crossed her arms defiantly. Look, I don't care what story she's telling. She doesn't belong in first class, and I'm not changing my position. Now can we please get this flight moving? We're already behind schedule because of her disruption. Captain Michael Brennan stood slowly, his full height imposing in the confined cockpit space. Helena Voss, you are hereby removed from this flight. Gather your belongings and report to your supervisor immediately. You can't remove me, Helena protested, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I was following proper procedures. That passenger was obviously out of place, and I handled the situation appropriately. The only thing out of place here is your prejudice and your complete lack of human decency. Captain Michael Brennan moved past Helena toward the cockpit door. Sarah, prepare an announcement. We're going to have a significant delay. Helena Voss grabbed Captain Michael Brennan's arm as he passed. You're making a huge mistake, Captain. That woman has you fooled. But I know what I saw. People like her don't fly first class on legitimate tickets. Captain Michael Brennan looked down at Helena's hand on his arm, then back at her face. Remove your hand from my person immediately. You have just sealed your fate with that statement. Helena released his arm, but continued her protest. Fine, but when this blows up in your face and you realize she was scamming the airline, don't come crying to me. I was protecting our passengers from potential fraud. Captain Michael Brennan reached for the cabin intercom system. His finger hovered over the button as he looked back at Helena one final time. The only thing you've done is reveal the depth of your character, and it's found wanting. The intercom crackled to life throughout the aircraft. Captain Michael Brennan's voice filled every seat, every overhead compartment, every corner of the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a significant delay due to a serious customer service issue that conflicts with our airline's stated values and my personal code of ethics. I apologize for this inconvenience, but some matters are more important than our departure schedule. In the cabin, passengers began murmuring among themselves. The bright overhead lighting illuminated confused faces and questioning expressions. Derek Monroe, still in his orange shirt, looked around the cabin with growing understanding. Helena Voss stared at the intercom in disbelief. Captain, you cannot be serious. You're going to delay this entire flight over one passenger complaint? I'm delaying this flight because one of America's greatest heroes was treated with discrimination and disrespect on my aircraft. Captain Michael Brennan's voice carried the authority of his military background. And frankly, Helena, your continued responses are making this situation much worse. Derek Monroe stood up in his coach seat, his voice carrying across the cabin. Excuse me, everyone. I witnessed what happened earlier. That woman they removed from first class was treated terribly. She was calm, respectful, and dignified throughout the entire ordeal. Other passengers began turning in their seats, craning their necks to hear more. A woman in a green blouse 3 rows behind Derek added her voice. I saw it too. The flight attendant was incredibly rude to her for no reason. She had a legitimate first-class ticket. Another passenger called out. I heard her trying to show it to the flight attendant, but she wouldn't even look at it. The murmurs grew louder as more passengers shared what they had observed. The bright cabin lighting seemed to illuminate the growing sense of injustice spreading throughout the aircraft. Helena Voss appeared in the cabin doorway, her red blazer now completely disheveled. Everyone needs to calm down and return to your seats. There's nothing to discuss here. Derek Monroe looked directly at Helena. Ma'am, with all due respect, what you did to that lady was wrong. She thanked me for my service when she realized I was military too. I could tell she was a veteran by the way she carried herself. A veteran? The word spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers began talking more animatedly, their voices mixing together in a growing chorus of concern and indignation. Captain Michael Brennan appeared behind Helena in the cabin doorway. His presence immediately commanded attention, and the cabin fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally address what happened on this aircraft today. Helena tried to interrupt. Captain, this is highly irregular. We should handle this privately. Captain Michael Brennan held up his hand, effectively silencing her. A passenger was discriminatorily removed from her assigned first-class seat based solely on the color of her skin. This passenger served our country with distinction in Afghanistan, where she saved numerous American lives under enemy fire. She is a Medal of Honor recipient, and she was treated with disrespect and prejudice on my aircraft. The cabin erupted in gasps and expressions of shock. Derek Monroe stood again, his voice filled with emotion. I knew it. I could tell she was someone special. The way she handled that situation with such dignity and grace. Where is she now? Called out a passenger from the middle of the cabin. Captain Michael Brennan's eyes found Captain Laura Mitchell sitting quietly in seat 24B, her green blouse still neat despite the ordeal, her posture maintaining the perfect military bearing that had first caught his attention. She is sitting in coach, where she was forced to relocate after being publicly humiliated. The entire cabin turned to look at Captain Laura Mitchell. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm and dignified. Despite being the center of attention, the bright overhead lighting seemed to create a halo effect around her, emphasizing her quiet strength. This is ridiculous, Helena Voss hissed under her breath, but her words were caught by the cabin's acoustics and heard by several passengers. Captain Michael Brennan made a decision that would define his career. Captain Mitchell, would you please join me in the front of the cabin? Captain Laura Mitchell rose gracefully from her seat, her movements precise and controlled. As she walked down the aisle, passengers began standing one by one. Derek Monroe was the first, followed by the woman in the green blouse, then others throughout the cabin. Helena Voss watched in growing horror as the entire aircraft gave Captain Laura Mitchell a spontaneous standing ovation. The sound of clapping filled the cabin, drowning out any protests Helena might have made. Captain Michael Brennan waited until Captain Laura Mitchell reached the front of the cabin before speaking again. Ladies and gentlemen, I am refusing to operate this flight until this situation is resolved appropriately. Some things are more important than schedules, and treating our nation's heroes with respect is one of them. The applause grew louder, and several passengers began calling out support for Captain Michael Brennan's decision. Helena Voss looked around the cabin, finally realizing that her position was completely untenable. Captain Laura Mitchell raised her hand gently, and the cabin gradually fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. Thank you, Captain Brennan, and thank you all for your kindness. I only ask that we use this moment to ensure that no one else experiences what happened today. The dignity in her response only served to highlight the contrast between her character and Helena's behavior. Captain Michael Brennan knew that this moment would change everything, and he was prepared to face whatever consequences came from doing what was right. The overhead fluorescent lights of the aircraft cabin cast everything in stark relief as heavy footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. Patricia Wells, the airport supervisor, strode through the aircraft door, wearing her crisp blue airline blazer, her face a mask of professional concern mixed with barely concealed panic. Behind her followed Michael Sterling, the corporate representative, his expensive gray suit perfectly tailored, but his expression growing more troubled with each step deeper into what he was beginning to realize was a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. The bright terminal lighting, streaming through the aircraft windows, illuminated a scene that made both airline officials stop short. Passengers throughout the cabin held their phones aloft, recording everything, their faces displaying a mixture of outrage and anticipation. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension and barely contained anger directed at the airline staff. Patricia Wells approached the cockpit area where Captain Michael Brennan stood waiting, his pilot's uniform immaculate under the harsh cabin lighting, his expression granite hard with determination. She extended her hand in greeting, attempting to project authority and control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Captain Brennan, I'm Patricia Wells, Airport Operations Supervisor. We need to resolve this delay immediately and get this aircraft moving. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding with a passenger." Captain Michael Brennan crossed his arms, his military bearing evident in every line of his posture. His voice carried the weight of absolute conviction when he spoke. "Ms. Wells, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is discrimination against a Medal of Honor recipient, and I will not move this aircraft 1 inch until Captain Laura Mitchell is present for this conversation and receives the respect she's earned through her service to this nation." Michael Sterling stepped forward, his corporate instincts kicking in as he attempted to take control of the situation. The bright overhead lighting revealed the sweat beginning to form on his brow, despite the cabin's air conditioning. "Captain Brennan, I'm Michael Sterling from corporate headquarters. I'm sure we can resolve this quickly and quietly. Where exactly is this passenger you're concerned about?" "She's in coach seat 24B, where your flight attendant banished her after removing her from the first-class seat she legitimately purchased." Captain Michael Brennan's voice carried across the cabin, and several passengers turned to listen intently. "And she's not just any passenger. She's Captain Laura Mitchell, United States Army Medal of Honor recipient, Afghanistan veteran." The color drained from Michael Sterling's face as the implications hit him like a physical blow. Patricia Wells grabbed his arm, her own expression transforming from annoyance to horror as she began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. Derek Monroe, the young passenger in his orange shirt who had been discreetly filming, raised his phone higher to capture the corporate officials' reactions. His live stream had already attracted hundreds of viewers, and the comments were flooding in faster than he could read them. "Bring Captain Mitchell forward immediately," Patricia Wells commanded, her voice cracking slightly under the pressure. "And someone get me a complete report on exactly what happened here." Helena Voss appeared from the galley area, her red uniform blazer now wrinkled and disheveled from the stress of the situation. Her face showed a mixture of defiance and growing uncertainty as she approached the group of officials. "Finally, some backup," Helena Voss declared, straightening her shoulders. "I've been dealing with this disruptive situation for over an hour. The passenger in question was clearly out of place in first class, and when Mr. Whitfield complained about feeling uncomfortable, I simply followed standard procedures." Captain Michael Brennan's jaw tightened as he stared at Helena Voss with undisguised contempt. "Standard procedures? You humiliated a war hero based on nothing more than the color of her skin and the complaints of a racist passenger. That's completely unfair," Helena Voss protested, her voice rising defensively. "I was just following company policy about passenger complaints and maintaining cabin harmony. I had no way of knowing she was supposedly some kind of soldier." "Medal of Honor recipient," Michael Sterling corrected sharply, his corporate mind already calculating the potential legal and financial disasters facing the airline. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Two flight attendants escorted Captain Laura Mitchell forward from coach, the bright cabin lighting illuminating her dignified bearing as she walked calmly through the aircraft. Her green blouse remained perfectly pressed despite the ordeal, and her military posture spoke of decades of service and sacrifice. Every passenger she passed turned to look, many recognizing something special about her presence. Patricia Wells immediately stepped forward, her hands extended in a gesture of apology and supplication. "Captain Mitchell, I am so deeply sorry for this inexcusable treatment. Please accept our most sincere apologies and allow us to make this right immediately." Captain Laura Mitchell nodded politely, her voice steady and professional, despite the public humiliation she had endured. "I appreciate your apology, Miss Wells. I trust this situation can be resolved appropriately." Michael Sterling moved closer, his expensive suit somehow seeming less impressive in the presence of Captain Laura Mitchell's quiet dignity. "Captain Mitchell, on behalf of the airline's corporate leadership, I want to personally apologize for this disgraceful treatment. We will make this right in every possible way." Helena Voss stepped forward, her red blazer catching the overhead light as she maintained her defensive posture. "Look, I'm sorry if there was some kind of mix-up, but I was just doing my job. I can't be expected to know every passenger's entire life story. I was following procedures based on legitimate passenger complaints." Captain Michael Brennan turned to face Helena Voss, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Even after learning that Captain Mitchell is a Medal of Honor recipient, you're still defending your actions? Your procedures are discrimination, plain and simple. I want her removed from this flight immediately." Captain Michael Brennan continued, addressing Patricia Wells directly. "I will not operate an aircraft with someone who treats our nation's heroes with such disrespect." Derek Monroe's phone captured every word as his live stream viewership climbed into the thousands. Comments poured in expressing outrage at Helena Voss's behavior and admiration for Captain Laura Mitchell's grace under pressure. Charles Whitfield, the businessman whose original complaint had started the entire incident, attempted to quietly move to a different seat near the back of first class. His expensive suit and nervous movements caught the attention of several passengers who had witnessed his earlier behavior. "Mr. Whitfield," called out a passenger from across the aisle, "wasn't it your complaint that started this whole mess?" Charles Whitfield sank lower in his seat, avoiding eye contact as other passengers began to focus their attention on him. His face flushed red as he realized his role in discriminating against a war hero was becoming public knowledge. Patricia Wells turned her attention back to Captain Laura Mitchell, her voice carrying genuine remorse mixed with corporate damage control instincts. "Captain Mitchell, we want to upgrade you to our premium first-class service at no charge, provide meal vouchers, and offer substantial flight credits for future travel." Captain Laura Mitchell shook her head gently, her response revealing the character that had earned her the nation's highest military honor. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Wells, but what I really want is for your airline to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training so this doesn't happen to anyone else." Michael Sterling's respect for Captain Laura Mitchell grew visibly as he witnessed her focus on systemic change rather than personal compensation. "That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from someone of your caliber, Captain Mitchell. We will absolutely implement those changes." Helena Voss continued protesting her innocence, her voice becoming more shrill as she realized the severity of her situation. "This is completely unfair. I was just following standard operating procedures. How was I supposed to know she was military? She didn't look like any soldier I've ever seen." The cabin fell silent at Helena Voss's words, the implication hanging heavy in the recycled air. Captain Michael Brennan's expression hardened further as he realized the depth of her prejudice. "And what exactly should a soldier look like, Helena?" Captain Michael Brennan asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Because the woman standing next to you risked her life to save dozens of American soldiers under enemy fire. She earned the Medal of Honor through courage and sacrifice that most of us can't even imagine." Patricia Wells made a quick decision, recognizing that Helena Voss's continued presence was making the situation worse. "Helena, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Please gather your belongings and leave the aircraft immediately." "This is completely unfair," Helena Voss protested, her red blazer now thoroughly wrinkled as she gestured frantically. "I'm being made a scapegoat for following company policies. This is discrimination against me." Michael Sterling stepped closer to Helena Voss, his corporate authority evident in every word. Ms. Voss, your behavior today has created a public relations catastrophe and potentially exposed the airline to massive legal liability. Your employment is suspended effective immediately. Derek Monroe's live stream had now attracted over 5,000 viewers, and the story was beginning to spread across social media platforms. Comments flooded in expressing support for Captain Laura Mitchell and condemnation of the airline's treatment of her. Captain Laura Mitchell maintained her military composure throughout the corporate scrambling, her dignity serving as a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. When Patricia Wells offered extensive compensation packages, Captain Laura Mitchell politely declined each one. What matters most is that your airline learns from this experience, Captain Laura Mitchell explained, her voice carrying the quiet authority earned through years of military leadership. Implement training programs that teach respect for all passengers regardless of their race or appearance. That would be far more valuable than any compensation you could offer me. Michael Sterling found himself genuinely impressed by Captain Laura Mitchell's character and grace under pressure. Captain Mitchell, would you consider consulting with our training department to help develop these programs? Your perspective would be invaluable. I would be honored to help prevent this from happening to others, Captain Laura Mitchell replied, her response drawing admiring nods from passengers throughout the cabin. Helena Voss gathered her belongings with jerky, angry movements. Her career in aviation effectively ended by her own prejudice and poor judgment. As she walked toward the aircraft exit, passengers openly stared and whispered about her role in discriminating against a war hero. The bright terminal lighting streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate the stark contrast between Helena Voss's disgrace and Captain Laura Mitchell's dignified handling of the entire situation. Justice was finally beginning to emerge from the chaos, and everyone present could feel the momentum building toward complete vindication for the decorated veteran who had maintained her composure throughout the ordeal. The bright fluorescent lights of Gate 47 suddenly blazed even brighter as news crews rushed through the terminal corridors, their professional camera equipment casting additional illumination across the crowded boarding area. Derek Monroe's live stream had exploded across social media platforms in real time, accumulating thousands of shares within the first 30 minutes of going live. His phone battery was nearly dead from the constant notifications, but he kept filming as the story of Captain Laura Mitchell's disgraceful treatment spread like wildfire through the digital landscape. Reporter Stephanie Park arrived with her camera crew, her red blazer perfectly pressed despite the rushed journey to the airport. She immediately began broadcasting live updates, her voice carrying the urgency of breaking news as she spoke directly into the camera lens under the bright terminal lighting. This is Stephanie Park reporting live from Dallas International Airport, where a shocking story of discrimination against a decorated war hero has captured national attention. What started as a routine flight has become a viral sensation, exposing deep-seated prejudices within our airline industry. Inside the aircraft cabin, the overhead fluorescent lights illuminated a scene of corporate damage control reaching crisis proportions. Helena Voss stood near the galley area, her red airline uniform now stripped of its service badges and insignia, the fabric wrinkled and disheveled from hours of escalating tension. Two airport security supervisors flanked her, their blue uniforms crisp under the cabin lighting as they prepared to escort her from the aircraft permanently. Michael Sterling, the corporate representative, held his phone pressed against his ear. His gray suit jacket loosened as he fielded increasingly frantic calls from airline headquarters. The stock price was already dropping in after-hours trading as news of the incident spread across social media platforms and traditional news outlets. Captain Michael Brennan emerged from the cockpit, his blue airline uniform perfectly pressed, carrying a folder containing Captain Laura Mitchell's military service documentation. The cabin had grown remarkably quiet as passengers sensed the gravity of the unfolding situation. He walked purposefully toward the intercom system, his expression reflecting both professional determination and personal anger at the injustice he had witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." His voice resonated through the cabin with unmistakable authority. "Before we continue with our flight operations, I have something extremely important to share with everyone aboard this aircraft." Captain Laura Mitchell sat in her reassigned first-class seat, her green blouse and dark jeans a stark contrast to the luxurious leather upholstery around her. Despite everything she had endured, her military bearing remained perfect, her hands folded calmly in her lap as she listened to Captain Michael Brennan's announcement. "Earlier today, our airline failed one of America's greatest heroes. The woman sitting in seat 3A is Captain Laura Mitchell, a decorated veteran of the United States Army who served multiple tours in Afghanistan. She is a recipient of the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor in combat." The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs as passengers turned to look at Captain Laura Mitchell, who maintained her humble demeanor despite the sudden attention. Several passengers immediately began recording the moment on their phones, recognizing they were witnessing something historically significant. Captain Michael Brennan continued reading from the official military documentation, his voice growing stronger with each word. Captain Mitchell's Medal of Honor was awarded for extraordinary heroism during enemy action in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Under intense enemy fire, she repeatedly exposed herself to mortal danger to rescue wounded soldiers, saving the lives of 23 American service members and 12 Afghan civilians. The spontaneous applause began in the front of the aircraft and quickly spread throughout the entire cabin. Passengers rose from their seats, creating a thunderous standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Many had tears in their eyes as they realized the magnitude of heroism they were in the presence of. Charles Whitfield, the entitled businessman who had originally complained about Captain Laura Mitchell's presence in first class, sank deeper into his seat in row 2, his expensive suit offering no protection from the judgmental stares of fellow passengers. His face had turned pale as the reality of his role in discriminating against a war hero became publicly apparent. Other passengers began pointing and whispering, recognizing him as the man who had demanded her removal. Derek Monroe stood in the aisle, his orange shirt bright under the cabin lighting, still live streaming as the passenger reaction continued. His commentary had become increasingly passionate as he documented the unfolding vindication. "Y'all seeing this right now? This is what happens when prejudice meets truth. This woman is a literal American hero, and that flight attendant treated her like garbage because of the color of her skin. This is why we have to keep filming, why we have to keep exposing this stuff." Helena Voss watched the scene unfold with growing horror, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. Her red airline blazer seemed to grow heavier on her shoulders as she realized her career was effectively over. The security supervisors began escorting her toward the aircraft exit, their polite but firm guidance making it clear her employment was terminated immediately. "This is insane," Helena Voss protested weakly as she was led away. "How was I supposed to know? She didn't look like a war hero. She was just sitting there reading a book." Her words were captured on multiple passenger recordings, further damaging her reputation and highlighting the depth of her prejudicial assumptions. The security supervisors remained professionally silent, but their expressions reflected their own disgust at her continued failure to accept responsibility. Captain Laura Mitchell rose gracefully from her seat and moved toward the intercom system at Captain Michael Brennan's invitation. The cabin fell completely silent as she prepared to address the passengers, her military posture commanding immediate respect and attention. "Thank you all for your kindness, but I want to be very clear about something." Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to leadership under pressure. "I didn't serve my country for recognition or special treatment. I served because I believe in the values that make America great: equality, justice, and treating every person with dignity and respect." Her words were being recorded on dozens of phones, each device capturing her message for immediate sharing across social media platforms. The hashtag #RespectOurHeroes was already beginning to trend nationally as Derek Monroe's followers shared the story exponentially. What happened today wasn't about me personally, Captain Laura Mitchell continued. It was about assumptions, prejudices, and the failure to see the humanity in every person. I hope this incident can become a teachable moment for positive change, not just in the airline industry, but in how we treat each other as Americans. The passengers applauded again, many wiping tears from their eyes as they absorbed the grace and wisdom in her response. Her humility in the face of such treatment only amplified their admiration and anger at her mistreatment. Outside the aircraft, civil rights attorney Carolyn Hughes hurried through the terminal in her professional blue suit and matching jacket, her legal briefcase in hand as she responded to Derek Monroe's call for assistance. She had immediately recognized the legal implications of the discrimination case and the potential for significant civil rights litigation. The terminal's bright fluorescent lighting illuminated growing crowds of travelers who had gathered near Gate 47, many holding their phones aloft to capture footage of the news crews and unfolding story. The incident was becoming a viral phenomenon that extended far beyond social media into mainstream news coverage. Stephanie Park continued her live broadcast, interviewing Derek Monroe about his decision to film the incident. His orange shirt made him easily identifiable to viewers as he explained his motivation for documenting the discrimination. "I knew something was wrong when I saw how that flight attendant was treating her," Derek Monroe explained to the camera. "Captain Mitchell had this dignity about her, this quiet strength that reminded me of my own grandfather who served in Vietnam. I started filming because I knew people needed to see the truth." Meanwhile, airline CEO Franklin Dorsey was conducting emergency conference calls from his corporate headquarters, the bright office lighting reflecting off his polished desk as he attempted to control the rapidly expanding public relations disaster. Stock prices had begun dropping immediately as news of the incident spread, with investors recognizing the potential liability and brand damage. "Get me a full incident report immediately," CEO Franklin Dorsey barked into his phone. "I want everyone involved in this situation identified, and I want comprehensive policy reviews implemented before morning. This cannot happen again." The airline's social media accounts were being flooded with angry comments and calls for boycotts, while #RespectOurHeroes continued gaining momentum across all major platforms. The story was being picked up by national news outlets, with television producers already planning special segments on discrimination and veteran treatment. Colonel Beverly Marsh, Captain Laura Mitchell's former commanding officer, received notification of the incident through military veteran networks. Within hours, she was appearing on television news programs, her blue military dress uniform reflecting the studio lighting as she defended Captain Mitchell's character and condemned the airline's treatment. "Captain Mitchell is one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to command," Colonel Beverly Marsh stated firmly during her television interview. "Her courage under fire saved dozens of lives, and her character is absolutely beyond reproach. The fact that she was treated this way is a disgrace to everything our service members sacrificed to protect." Back on the aircraft, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Passengers approached Captain Laura Mitchell respectfully, many thanking her for her service and expressing their outrage at her treatment. She responded to each person with gracious humility, deflecting praise while emphasizing the importance of systemic change. Charles Whitfield remained in his seat, now completely isolated as other passengers recognized his role in the discrimination. His business associates would soon learn of his involvement through the viral videos, and the professional consequences would be swift and severe. Captain Michael Brennan prepared for departure, but the delay had created a ripple effect throughout the airline's operations. More importantly, the incident had triggered conversations about discrimination and veteran treatment that would extend far beyond this single flight. As Helena Voss was escorted through the terminal, her red uniform serving as a symbol of corporate failure and personal prejudice. The magnitude of the story continued expanding. The incident had become more than just one woman's mistreatment. It had evolved into a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the values America claims to represent. The bright terminal lights continued illuminating the scene as Captain Laura Mitchell's story spread across the nation. Her grace under pressure inspiring millions, while exposing the persistent challenges of discrimination in American society. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the downtown Chicago retail store where Helena Voss now worked, casting harsh fluorescent light across the discount clothing racks she was arranging. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight, and the woman who once wielded power over first-class passengers now folded clearance items for minimum wage. Her red polo shirt and khaki pants bore the generic uniform of retail mediocrity, a far cry from the prestigious airline blazer she once wore with such misplaced authority. Helena's hands trembled slightly as she hung up discounted blouses, the viral video of her discriminatory behavior having destroyed any chance of returning to the airline industry. Every major carrier had blacklisted her after the Captain Laura Mitchell incident became national news. The customers who recognized her would sometimes whisper and point, forcing Helena to duck her head in shame. Her supervisor, Marcus Thompson, a young black man in his 20s, wearing an orange company shirt and dark slacks, watched her with professional distance. He knew exactly who she was, and while he treated her fairly, there was no warmth in their interactions. Meanwhile, across town in a gleaming corporate boardroom, filled with natural skylight and overhead lighting, the airline's executive team gathered around a conference table, displaying impressive quarterly reports. CEO Franklin Dorsey, wearing his standard blue business suit, addressed the room with barely contained satisfaction. The Captain Laura Mitchell protocol has not only restored our reputation, but actually improved our customer satisfaction ratings by 30%. We've become the industry standard for anti-discrimination training. Captain Michael Brennan, now wearing the distinguished uniform of chief pilot with long sleeves and additional insignia, sat at the head of the training table in the airline's new Diversity Education Center. Before him sat 24 new flight attendants, all wearing matching red training blazers, listening intently as he recounted the events that changed their company forever. Captain Laura Mitchell showed us that dignity isn't about what someone looks like or where you think they belong. It's about recognizing the humanity and worth in every person who steps onto our aircraft. The training room's walls displayed enlarged photographs from Captain Laura Mitchell's Medal of Honor ceremony, her image radiating quiet strength in her formal military dress uniform. Each new employee learned her story not as a cautionary tale, but as an inspiration for the level of respect every passenger deserved. Captain Michael Brennan's voice carried the weight of experience as he continued. When you see someone in your cabin, you're not just seeing a passenger. You might be serving a war hero, a Nobel Prize winner, or someone's beloved grandmother. Treat them all with the same respect you'd want for your own family. In her comfortable office at the Veterans Affairs consulting firm, Captain Laura Mitchell sat behind a polished desk, wearing a professional green blazer and matching slacks, reviewing applications for the scholarship fund that now bore her name. The afternoon light filtered through large windows as she carefully read each veteran's story, her heart touched by their struggles and determination to build better lives after service. Her assistant, Jennifer Walsh, the same flight attendant who had initially supported Helena's discrimination, now worked as Captain Laura Mitchell's administrative coordinator after leaving the airline industry voluntarily to make amends for her role in the incident. Jennifer, wearing a blue professional blouse and dark pants, approached Captain Laura Mitchell's desk with a stack of speaking engagement requests. "Ma'am, you have 17 more universities requesting presentations this month. Plus the Department of Defense wants to feature your story in their new inclusion training program." Captain Laura Mitchell looked up with the same humble expression she'd maintained throughout her unexpected fame. her military bearing softened by genuine warmth. "Schedule them all, Jennifer. If sharing my story can prevent even one person from experiencing discrimination, then every speech is worth it." Captain Laura Mitchell's transformation from anonymous passenger to national advocate had been reluctant but thorough. She used her platform not for personal gain, but to spotlight the broader issues of respect, dignity, and the invisible service members who walked among civilians every day. Derek Monroe had leveraged his viral documentation of the incident into a successful career as a civil rights filmmaker. In his bright, naturally lit studio apartment, he sat before multiple monitors wearing his signature orange t-shirt and blue jeans, editing his latest documentary about discrimination in the transportation industry. The Captain Laura Mitchell case had opened doors for him to tell similar stories of injustice and resilience, each project funded by his growing reputation for capturing truth in real time. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Laura Mitchell. "Saw your latest film screening announcement. Proud of how you're using your platform. Thank you for standing up that day." Derek smiled, remembering how his instinct to start recording had helped create accountability in a situation that might otherwise have been forgotten or dismissed. Charles Whitfield's fall from grace had been swift and merciless. The businessman who had complained about Captain Laura Mitchell's presence in first class now sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, having lost his consulting contracts and social standing when his role in the discrimination became public knowledge. His expensive suits hung unused in his closet, while he wore simple sweatshirts and jeans. His professional network, having abandoned him after the viral video revealed his entitled attitude and racist assumptions. The companies that had once sought his business expertise now viewed him as a liability, his name forever associated with the kind of prejudice that modern corporations desperately avoided. Charles had tried issuing public apologies, but they rang hollow after the video clearly showed his satisfaction at Captain Laura Mitchell's humiliation. He spent his days scrolling through social media, watching Captain Laura Mitchell's inspiring speeches and wondering how he had been so blind to his own prejudice. At the airline's headquarters, the transformation was visible in every department. Lucia Navarro, now promoted to Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator, wore her blue blazer with pride as she conducted sensitivity training for gate agents. Her first-hand witness to Captain Laura Mitchell's treatment had motivated her to ensure no passenger would ever again face such discrimination at their airline. The company had invested millions in the Captain Laura Mitchell protocol, but the returns were measurable not just in improved reputation, but in employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. Flight attendants reported feeling more confident in their ability to handle difficult situations with dignity and respect, while passengers frequently praised the airline's commitment to treating everyone with equal courtesy. Captain Laura Mitchell's influence extended far beyond one airline or even the aviation industry. Military bases across the country now featured her story in their transition programs, helping veterans understand their worth as they returned to civilian life. Her message was simple but powerful. Service and sacrifice deserved recognition, but more importantly, every human being deserved basic respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. The scholarship fund bearing her name had already helped dozens of veterans pursue education and career training, funded by the compensation money she had initially refused but accepted when told it would help other service members. Captain Laura Mitchell had turned her moment of humiliation into a legacy of empowerment, creating opportunities for veterans who might otherwise struggle to find their footing in civilian careers. Colonel Beverly Marsh, Captain Laura Mitchell's former commanding officer, frequently spoke at military academies about leadership and moral courage, using Captain Laura Mitchell's graceful response to discrimination as an example of how true strength revealed itself not in retaliation but in dignity. Captain Mitchell showed us that sometimes the greatest victory comes from maintaining your principles When others abandoned theirs, she would tell young cadets wearing their crisp blue uniforms. The ripple effects of that single flight continued to spread. Other airlines adopted similar anti-discrimination protocols, while civil rights organizations used Captain Laura Mitchell's story as a powerful example of how individual dignity could spark systemic change. Her quiet strength had inspired a movement without her ever seeking to be its leader. As the 6-month anniversary of the incident approached, Captain Laura Mitchell found herself boarding another flight, this time for a speaking engagement at a veterans hospital. The morning light filled the airport terminal as she approached the gate, wearing her signature green blouse and dark slacks, carrying the same worn leather bag that had accompanied her on that transformative journey months earlier. The gate agent, properly trained under the new protocols, greeted her with professional warmth. "Good morning, Captain Mitchell. Thank you for your service, and we're honored to have you flying with us today." The words were genuine, not scripted, representing the cultural shift that had occurred throughout the industry. As Captain Laura Mitchell settled into her first-class seat, the flight attendant, a young woman in a perfectly pressed red blazer, approached with sincere respect. "Captain Mitchell, I wanted to personally thank you. Your story was featured in my training, and it completely changed how I view my role. I'm not just serving passengers, I'm serving heroes, families, and people with stories I may never know. Thank you for teaching us all how to do better." Captain Laura Mitchell smiled with the same humble grace she had maintained throughout her unexpected journey from anonymous passenger to national inspiration. "Thank you for listening and for treating everyone with the dignity they deserve. That's all any of us can ask for." As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Captain Laura Mitchell opened her book, the same military history volume she had been reading during that fateful flight 6 months earlier. But now she read in peace, knowing that her experience had created lasting change, ensuring that future passengers would be judged not by their appearance, but by their humanity. The transformation was complete, but the legacy continued to grow with every respectful interaction, every training session, and every veteran who walked a little taller, knowing their service was finally recognized and valued. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.